right here on this coastline, in a forest whose ownership traces back to a court ruling in 1918. Nigeria is building a second refinery worth around $3.5 billion, and almost nobody outside this country is talking about it. Let me show you why this one matters. This whole region, the Niger Delta, pulls between 1 to 2 million barrels of crude oil out of the ground every day, and has done this since 1950s. Nigeria is one of OPEC's largest African producers, and yet for 40 years, Nigerians have been standing in queues like this one, buying petrol that came from somewhere else. The crude oil goes out to European refineries. The refined petrol comes back in, and Nigerian government pays the difference. By 2023, that bill was $7.5 billion a year. Then two things happened that broke the cycle. On 29th of May 2023, Nigeria's new president Bola Tinubu says 3 words in his inaugural speech.
The first subsidy is gone.
Subsidy is gone. Within 24 hours, the pump price of petrol triples. 8 months later, right here on Lagos coast, Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man, fires up the largest single train refinery on the planet. 650,000 barrels a day, $20 billion to build. Most people look at this and thought, okay, Nigeria's import problem is over. But here is what they missed. Hundreds of kilometers east of Lagos, back here in this forest, a second mega refinery is going up. 200,000 barrels a day, around $3.5 billion. The refinery will be built by Nigeria's second richest man, Abdul Samad Rabiu. And that brings us to the big missing question in this whole story. We know it's a $3.5 billion refinery. We know who is building it, but why here and why now? This is a story about a century-old conflict, a bet on Nigeria's future, and why a few thousands of hectares of land in Akwa Ibom state of Nigeria might just change the maths for everyone. Let's dig into it. To understand why a single private refinery now matters this much, you have to understand the shape of the problem it is solving. Nigeria sits on roughly 37 billion barrels of proven crude reserves. It is one of OPEC's largest African producers, and yet until 2024, it depended on import for almost all the refined petrol, what Nigerians call PMS, Premium Motor Spirit, that powers its economy. Nigeria has 3 refineries. Port Harcourt Refining Company, built in 1960s and expanded in the 1980s. Warri Refining Petrochemical Company, commissioned in 1978. Kaduna Refining and Petrochemical Company, commissioned in 1980. Together on paper, they have a combined nameplate capacity of about 445,000 barrels per day. In practice, for most of the last 2 decades, they produce almost nothing. To keep petrol affordable at the pump, successive governments paid a subsidy on every imported liter. The Nigerian National Petroleum Company, NNPC, the state oil firm, was the sole importer. The bill ballooned. By early 2020s, the government was spending more on fuel subsidy than on health and education combined. Then on 29th of May 2023, on the day he was sworn in, President Bola Tinubu said 3 words in his inaugural speech: subsidy is gone. Within 24 hours, the pump price of petrol roughly tripled from around 198 naira to over 500. Within a year, it pushed past 900 in parts of the country. The fuel subsidy was gone, but Nigeria was still heavily dependent on imported fuel. The country did not yet have enough refining capacity to meet its own demand, which is what made the next 2 projects so consequential. First, you probably have heard of Dangote, but you may not have heard of Abdul Samad Rabiu, the owner of BUA. The man behind BUA Refinery is Abdul Samad Rabiu. Abdul Samad Rabiu is a Nigerian industrialist born in Kano on the 4th of August 1960 and the founder and chairman of BUA Group, a privately held Nigerian conglomerate active in cement, sugar, flour, rice, port, and now oil refining. He inherited the instinct of the trade from his father, Khalifa Isiaku Rabiu, one of dominant Nigerian industrialists of the 1970s and 1980s, whose textile and commodities empire collapsed in the volatility of those decades. Abdul Samad studied economics at Capital University in Ohio, United States, came home, and in 1988 founded BUA Group as a trading house, importing iron, steel, and food. For the first 2 decades, BUA was a serious but second-tier company. Then in 2009, it bought a controlling stake in a publicly listed cement company of northern Nigeria. From there, the empire scaled. BUA Cement went public on Nigerian Exchange in January 2020. BUA Food followed in January 2022. Together, they sit among the most valuable listed companies in the sub-Saharan Africa. By 2026, Rabiu's personal net worth had passed $14 billion on the Bloomberg indices, and earlier this year, Bloomberg's tracker briefly placed him above Johann Rupert as Africa's second richest individual behind only Aliko Dangote himself. That last detail is not incidental. For more than a decade, Rabiu and Dangote have run along parallel tracks, cement against cement, sugar against sugar, flour against flour. When Dangote announced his refinery in 2013, the assumption in the industry was that no Nigerian would build a second one at scale. The market was crowded, the capital was scarce, the risk was enormous. In September 2020, Rabiu announced he was building one anyway. He signed a contract with Axens, a French petroleum technology firm and a subsidiary of the IFP Energy's Novel Research Institute, to supply the process technology for a 200,000 barrel per day integrated refinery and petrochemical complex on Nigeria's southeastern coast. Engineering will be led by KBR, the American contractor that does front-end design work for major hydrocarbon projects. Project management will go to Olax Engineering, Lumus Novelent Technology, a German licensor, will supply the gas phase polypropylene technology for a 285,000 tons per year unit attached to the refinery. The total bill, depending on which source you read, sits between $3.5 billion and $3.8 billion. The site he picked is what made the project geographically interesting and politically complicated. The site sits in Ibeno, a local government area in Akwa Ibom State, on the southeastern Atlantic coast of Nigeria, inside the federal forest reserve known as Stop Creek, gazetted in 1930 as a biodiversity hotspot, and by the second half of the 20th century, also one of the country's most strategically important oil production zones. There are 3 reasons that patch of coastline was worth the trouble. The first is the feedstock. The Akwa Ibom Shelf sits next to some of Nigeria's most productive offshore oil blocks, the same field that have fed ExxonMobil's terminal, also in Ibeno, for half a century. The Mobile base is the longest running offshore oil operation in Nigeria. Putting a refinery next door cuts down the logistic journey from wellhead to crude distillation unit. The second is export access. Nigeria refining capacity is concentrated heavily on the western side of the country. Lagos, Warri, and Akwa Ibom plant gives BUA a deepwater Atlantic frontage facing south and east towards Cameroon, Gabon, and Angola, and across to the polypropylene market of Southern Europe. Abdul Samad Rabiu put it directly in 2020, the marine infrastructure was the point, the external market for polypropylene was very strong. The third reason is industrial. The area was already designated free trade and industrial zone with the kind of land use approval and custom handling that a project of this size needs. The refinery itself is what specialists call an RFCC-based complex. RFCC stands for Residue Fluid Catalytic Cracking, a refining configuration designed to take heavier crude fraction, the part that less sophisticated refineries simply turn into fuel oil, and crack them into higher value products: motor gasoline, polypropylene, lighter distillate. It is in industrial terms a long-life deep diversion design built to wring more refined fuel out of every barrel. What comes out of the plant on paper is gasoline, meeting Euro V specification. Euro V is the European Union's fifth-stage vehicle emission standard for fuel quality, with sulfur capped at 10 parts per million. Most fuel sold in Nigeria today is far dirtier than that. Diesel and jet fuel, also Euro V grade. Liquefied petroleum gas, LPG, the cooking gas Nigeria still imports in large volumes, and the petrochemical 280,000 tons a year of polypropylene, the plastic resin used in everything from food packaging to car bumpers to medical equipment, a product Nigeria currently imports almost entirely. The polypropylene unit matters more than it sounds. It means BUA is not just betting on petrol prices, it is betting on Nigeria's plastic value chain, the manufacturing that sits downstream of refining, and that in most oil-producing countries is where the longer-term industrial wealth actually accumulates. The original target for the first oil was 2024, then 2025. Then as of the company's own statement in January 2025, simply on track to meet delivery timelines. What the statement did not say is why those timelines kept slipping. The forest the refinery is being built in has been the subject of a contested ownership claim that predates Nigerian independence. In 1918, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in London, at that time the highest court of appeal for British colonial territories, had a land case from what was then southern Nigeria over rights to Stop Creek. The case was between two parties from the area. The Privy Council issued a ruling. A century later, no one agrees on what the ruling actually settled. The Ekiti People's Union, EPU, the umbrella body representing communities in the Ekiti and Ekiti local government areas, argues that the 1918 judgment established the ancestral ownership of Stop Creek and that BUA's land titles in the forest are therefore invalid. They point to ExxonMobil's earlier operations in the area as an example. According to their argument, the forest reserve was first officially removed from protected status. Compensation was paid to Ekiti people as the recognized landowners, and only then was the land made available for development. The Ibeno community, where the refinery is officially located, sees the issue differently. The Ibeno Clan Council argues that the colonial-era court ruling did not give ownership of the forest as claimed. According to the council, the land is government property under laws introduced after Nigeria's independence, and BUA is operating legally on land allocated to it by the Akwa Ibom State Government of Nigeria. The Akwa Ibom State Government has taken the Ibeno side of the legal argument. Its Commissioner for Justice has publicly stated that the 1918 Privy Council case did not vest ownership of Stop Creek in any single ethnic group. The dispute is one of the several reasons BUA timeline has slipped. There is engineering complexity. Building an RFCC platform from scratch is a 5 to 7 year project even for the most experienced developers, and Olax Engineering only started its project management contract in October 2020. There is the global cost inflation curve that hit every major project after COVID-19 shock and the 2022 commodity spikes. There is the macro environment, a 70% naira devaluation, a foreign exchange crunch, and a refinancing risk that hit dollar-dominated debt against naira-dominated political pressure. But the land question is the one that does not get easier with engineering. So what does BUA actually change? If you simply add up nameplate capacities, Nigeria's refining picture in 2022 looks like this. Dangote Refinery Lekki 650,000 barrels per day, now expanding to a planned 1.4 million barrels per day. Port Harcourt, Warri, and Kaduna combine roughly 445,000 barrels per day in nameplate terms, with NNPC reporting partial restart of Port Harcourt and Warri in 2024. The cluster of modular refineries, Aradel, OPAC, Edo, Walter Smith, Dupont Midstream, adding roughly 30,000 barrels per day, and BUA, when it comes on stream, adding another 200,000. In other words, BUA is being built into a market that may end up structurally oversupplied. This is the strategic bet behind the project. Rabiu and his team are not trying to refine petrol for the queues in Lagos that defines the 2010s. They are building for what comes after, for fuel export into the wider West African market, for jet fuel into the regional aviation hubs, for diesel into mining economies of the Sahel, and above all for petrochemical feedstock into the continental plastic and packaging industry that currently import almost everything it consumes. If that bet works, BUA stop being a Nigerian refinery and start being an African one. If you love definitive African infrastructure projects like this, please like and subscribe.